So first and foremost, we're going to do a little quick vocabulary check because I feel like as community organizers, we all use a lot of the same words and maybe they mean something a little different to you than they mean to me. I say champion, you say advocate. You say MVP, I say moderator. So let's just make sure for 2 seconds that you know the words that Dave and I are using and in what context for our community that we're referencing throughout this presentation. So when we say user group or chapter, what we mean is a gathering of individuals who have a similar interest either in a particular region or city, or it could even be topic-based. So we actually transitioned, we started doing a lot of online meetings, and we found that, you know, online isn't all in one place. So we started doing some really cool topic-based stuff. So something along those lines, we mean a user group. And for us, those user groups, like typical attendance was, what do you say, Dave, like 30 to 50 people? Like that was about median, somewhere in there. Yeah. And next one is events. We would call this an event. So usually we had like 1 presenter or 2 presenters. We get together for a couple of hours, do some food, do some chatting, and learn some stuff. That was our #1 objective, learn some stuff. And next word, member, also user. So we're talking about you know, a CAD community, an engineering and design community. So when we say member or user, we're talking about somebody who uses the software on a day-to-day basis. We're really talking about an end user who's raised their hand and said, tell me more, I want to learn stuff, I want to be better, I want to get a raise. That's who we're talking about. And finally, my favorite people in the whole community, the organizers. So when I say user group leader, what I mean is somebody like Dave who works a full-time job, has other responsibilities, has the family, has the whole list, and also said, you know what? I love your logo so much. I'm also going to host 4 to 6 events a year, and we're going to see where it goes. So when we say user group leader, we mean event organizer, and those guys run those events. They represent local partnerships and really bring people into the space. And one more just quick level set. This is kind of how we were built. So it was a pretty mature community. At the top, you would have our community team. So that would be a spearhead specifically for this network. Next step down, and this is what we're going to talk about today, are your top tier organizers. So the people who raised their hand, you really cultivated them, you really brought them up and taught them how to answer all the questions the way that you would. And they organize events and they really represent the logo across the world. And then the members who attend. So this is sort of our pyramid. This was our structure. So when you hear me say, Dave's a committee rep, what I mean is he is an organizer, but he is also part of that upper echelon because he's experienced, he's a veteran at this, he knows what works and what doesn't. So he takes additional time to reach back and pull those new organizers up and help make them better. So that would be a committee or a top tier organizer for us. All right, vocabulary lesson is done. Let's get to the good stuff. How and who are your organizers? How do you find them? I know a lot of you are probably starting this journey, right? It's a 101 today. So if our ultimate brand advocate is somebody who agrees to host events for you and not be on payroll, how do you create them? How do you build them up? So for me, my perspective is that my organizers are just Rachel 2.0s. I want to make sure that my organizers knew everything that I knew, and in most cases, then some, right? Some of them got to a place where they'd investigate things in such a way they'd know more about certain programs than I would. So that's amazing. I want Rachel 2.0s all over the network. So when I say who are your organizers, they're you. I believe that I can't be in 2 places at once. I can't take all of the phone calls for an organization this big. So I need help. I need the 2.0s. So if any person on the street had a question about the brand, Dave knew the answers. And not only did he know the answers, but he knew how I would answer them, because we discussed it and we talked about we didn't talk about the tone, right? Every brand has a tone and a vibe and a thing. We didn't talk about it, but we connected enough that I was able to deliver and sort of show that to organizers across the board, and they just adopted it. So just a natural consequence of regular communication and really working with these guys to level them up. If anybody had questions about the network, these organizers have benefited from the network in such a way at some point in time that they said, this is awesome. I want to host events too. For you to say that means that you already got something out of it. So my story is, and this is why I will forever, ever, ever point people to this network, is one that maybe, I don't know, people don't say out loud enough, but my loyalty lies in the fact that this network has always, always, always helped me put food on the table. I've always had a paycheck in the bank. I've always had a job. So for me, when I was really, really early starting out, the bottom fell out, right? Remember 2007, 2008, we don't talk about it. But when the bottom fell out, I was the last one in, first one out. And I almost immediately lost my job. But I was a member of this incredible group or chapter in San Antonio. And I called around and I said, hey, what do I do? And I ended up actually relocating because of the crash. And when I got there wasn't a user group. So I started one because I had to learn, I had to get to know people because I really needed to find a job. And no kidding, the company who agreed to host my first meeting, we hosted it on a Thursday. They gave me a job on Monday. So this network really, really empowered me to take care of the things that got to get taken care of. So a lot of the loyalty for me lies in that empowerment and that reciprocation throughout my experience. And of course, if they need to know somebody, they know a guy. They know everybody I know. At this point, Dave's introduced me to some of the coolest people on the planet. So we share all of these introductions. We share all of these things. So when I say, who are your organizers? And Dave, I want you to talk about this a little bit too, if you would. I think that you could say, a community manager, and you got to be super comfortable with them being in the room when you're not in it. They know everything you know. They know how to say it. You got to let it go. And they're just additional community managers for your logo. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, to Rachel's point, I mean, early on when we were building up these communities, you know, it's a really grassroots thing. You're literally knocking on doors, visiting businesses, cold calling, like Rachel cold called me in my office one day to ask me if I wanted to come present for, you know, a user group. You're building those personal and professional connections, right? And you have to be open. If you share that transparency, it trickles down. So yeah. when Rachel talks about knowing the guy, anytime I had an issue related to my specific community or it's a technical community, specific issues that literally affect our day-to-day, how to get work done, how to literally keep this business open because we have a problem, I knew I could rely on somebody in our community who could reach out to the community on my behalf. And she trusted me the other way. When someone was reaching out to her, she knew she could call on me and vice versa. So, you know, it definitely requires a lot of openness, a lot of truth when maybe you don't want to share all the truth. I mean, there is a reality to it, but it builds that trust, which is kind of critical to Rachel's point, is you trust that person to represent you and your community in a positive light wherever they are around the world. And if they don't know the answer, they know they've got a connection to go find it.
Exactly. So I think the next big thing here that y'all are probably wondering is, what all are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk about three big things today. We're going to talk about playing the long game. So like I said, Dave and I have been working together for 10, 12 years at this point, and there's been a lot of things that have happened. So we're going to try to give you some context to that story and some of those progressions, and how we have changed sort of the program and the way things were going. We're going to talk about organizer communications. Say that 10 times fast. We're going to talk about a way, one of the most challenging things for me as the spearhead is that I did know about all of the programs. I did know about all of the things that the brand was doing. I did know, I had all of this stuff in my head. So when somebody would ask me a question, I'd give them a 30-minute brain dump. And that wasn't what they needed. So I really had to refine and come up with a communications plan to make that more of a slow drip. And long term, you know, a year from now, you'll know everything that I know, and I'll be much more comfortable with you out in the space with that logo behind you. So the next thing we did, and this is really important, and this is maybe not talked about enough, is that professional skills development piece of the puzzle. So Dave and I have talked a lot about this over the years. I'll tell y'all, my first event that I ran, it was ugly. I did not know how to get in front of a room. I didn't know how to introduce a speaker. I had no idea how to craft a presentation or an outline. I didn't know how to do any of those things. And for us as community managers and event organizers, right, I think we sometimes take those skills for granted. So Dave and I really put a lot of time into just making sure that our organizers had some basic skills that maybe get overlooked. So we're going to talk about some of those things too, and why we think they're also very important to that comms plan and how you work with your guys. And that's part of that reciprocation. It's part of that loyalty. Not only am I asking you to host these events, but I'm gonna make sure you have every template you need. I'm gonna make sure if you're not comfortable with public speaking, I help you with that. Whatever you raise your hand and say, I don't feel comfortable, I'm gonna make sure that we create a space to help make you comfortable and to help you develop those skills, whatever they may be, because ultimately it's gonna make the events better. It's gonna make more people show up to the events, and that's going to positively impact the brand in the long run. So we wanna love them. We want them to love us. So everybody's gotta show the love. So what I wanna go through here, this is, where do you find your organizers? Man, they're everywhere. I don't know two organizers whose story is the same. I could have superhero movies across the board, all of them different origin stories. So we had a sort of a 4-stage process that we worked through, and all of our internal brand teams sort of knew what this was. And I'm sure you've got a social media team, right? You probably got social media channels out there. You've probably got a killer marketing team who is just putting together the best content ever. You've probably got maybe a forum or a Slack channel. You have all of these places where your people are today. So that's where your organizers are. But remember, you have to build them. They're not just going to fall out of thin air. You're not just going to find a guy in the forum that's all of a sudden the best organizer on the planet. You're really going to have to work with him and teach him or her these things, right? So discovery can come from all of these places. Really, I think the most important part is that you take some action after you put that content in the world. So you put a really cool video out there on YouTube and somebody comments on it and says something, you gotta reach out. Say, hey, what's going on? If somebody ats your brand and shows you something that they're really proud of, you have to take that next engagement. You got to take one-on-one phone calls. You have to ask them what's up, who they are, how's it going? How can I help you today? So one of my favorite things that we used to do, I had an incredible intern team. So once a week, I got sort of a report like, hey, here's some of the cool stuff that we saw throughout these, all these programs that are going on. You should reach out to so-and-so. And I got a report with this picture on it. And I was like, man, this guy's he's got ninja swords. And he tagged us. What is this? And anyway, this is my friend Kirby Downey. I reached back out and said, hey, I'm the community manager. I work really closely with the user groups. Like, you got to get on the phone with me and tell me about your art. You have to tell me what's going on. I really want to get to know you. And he did. I mean, within 10 minutes, he responded back. We set up time. We talked. And 6 years later, he's on the organizer committee with Dave. And that, like I said, the long game, right? I say 6 years later, and some of you went, oh my gosh, that's so long. But we benefited from each other throughout the entire course of that. So I met him. I said, hey, man, you should do some technical content, really help users get excited about the ways that you're doing things because your artwork is exciting. So he built me content. I sent people to his channel. We put him on some community advisory boards. We put him in a lot of different spaces within our organization before he entertained the idea of becoming an organizer. So that whole thing was a mutual success, but it did take a lot of time to get him to the top of the pyramid. And then those rewards, the chat is, there's a lot in the chat. I saw something go by about rewards earlier. I start with the easiest one. And I think the easiest one is just your time. And it's the most complimentary, right? Start with those phone calls, start with those interviews, really get to know people, and ask your teams that you work with internally, who are the top 5 names that you see out there all the time? Well, who are they? What do they do? What's the next thing? And really start to engage them and keep it cheap, keep it simple. Rewards can be progressive. I wouldn't start with anything bigger than a like on a comment and just see where it goes. And then, you know, you got your swag bags, you got your big trips, you got all that stuff, but make sure that that's later on. I wouldn't come out the gate with the big money rewards. So one of the things about all of the things that we just talked about, you saw the word audience on that slide a lot. And, you know, it wouldn't be CMX if I didn't talk about David Spinks. So you saw, like I said, oh, you know what? Ooh, I'm one slide ahead of myself. So one of the questions that I want you to ask, I'm so sorry. All of these programs, like I said, you got social media, you got marketing content, you maybe have Slack or forums or all these places where your users are, and you're identifying them, you're maybe reaching out, you're getting to know them a little bit. How can I help you? How can you help me? One of the things I think is really important is to just take a minute, write all of those programs down on paper and say, how do they interlock? How do they dovetail? So do my guys on the forum and do those interactions, when they answer those questions, do they follow up and say, hey, I'm actually going to do a presentation on this at the user group network. You should come see the extended conversation live. Do the people in the user group meetings and the organizers, do they point people back to those resources when it's all over? What do those interdependencies look like? And does every participant in every program, because like I said, every origin story is different, do they know that your user group community exists? And how do you make sure that they share that excitement? Dave, can you talk a little bit about one of the things I know we did for organizers? We sort of put together like a starter slide deck for them to host their event. So at the end of that deck, one of the things that we did is said, here's the list of all of the other stuff that you should know about. So here's the Experimental Aircraft Association. Here's all of these programs that we're partnered with. Can you talk about before and after we did that?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I'll back up to a previous point too. I mean, you talk about some of the individuals that you highlight. I mean, Kirby's doing more and more since then, right? Like he started as a user group leader. Now he's a regional leader. We just had a 24-hour event for our community. I think it was 2 weekends ago. And he was the unofficial MC for 24 hours on an international event. I mean, it grows and grows and grows, and you start to empower people. And I think that's a big part here with some of this early setup stuff is when Rachel and I were founding our groups and starting our communities, we had a rough roadmap for how it had been done before, but some groups are doing it different than others. Some groups have different skill sets. And when you start to push all those to a certain baseline where everybody knows how to establish a group, how to do simple things like AV when you're hosting in a foreign place you've never been before. It just takes all of those small things that you struggle with out of the equation and make it so that you can host large meetings. I mean, for example, I went from hosting when me and Rachel first kicked off groups, that were 20, 25 people to 75 people, 80 people, and I'm the only organizer there. And, so you got to have a lot of things figured out and down pat so that you can do that and then keep growing and keep doing more and try new things. And you got to go for where the help is needed. We're going to talk more about that later, but I had specific things I needed help with and kind of went to Rachel with like, man, it'd be great if I had uniform slide decks. It'd be great if I had some updated outlines, some updated logos, you know, just things to make my group look more professional and help the other groups around me look more uniform. It's another big part of it. But yeah, I'll let Rachel get back to even more of this, but it just exponential growth.
Then I think that's it, right? Those templates, stuff is simple as these are the 5 key programs that we run. Here's all of our social channels, put them on a slide. Here's our community forum or our Slack channels or whatever, put them on a slide. Make sure your organizers have that stuff so that they don't have to go find it. They don't have to build it. And all throughout the universe, when you go to an event in your community, everybody sees that as the closer. Everybody knows what the CTA is. We want you to leave this event. We want you to come to the next one. But in the meantime, catch us over here. Come play in this other space. And now I'll go back to where I skipped. Wouldn't be CMX Summit if we didn't reference David Spinks. So a lot of these things we're talking about social channels, we're talking about marketing content, we're talking about technical training. And on that whole slide, the word said audience, and it was intentional. So as a brand builds an audience, that's the brand building all that content. It's internal resources. It's us as community managers building all of this stuff to just push and help someone. And that needs to happen. That should absolutely happen. But to build a community, you have to start having those one-on-one moments. You have to start saying, Dave, how can I help you help the next guy? How can I turn around and pull somebody up the pyramid? What can I do? You really have to start helping people help each other. So that's the next step. You have your audience. Everyone in that audience has potential to become an organizer. And we're going to talk about what happened with me and Dave to give context to the long game here. So you bounced it back pretty quick, but now it's your turn to tell a story.
Yeah, sure. I mean, talking about how long these things take, you know, it all started, like I said, with us, just a cold call. Rachel reached out to me. I was a young engineer. She was a young engineer. We were trying to build some stuff up and reach out to other engineers in our community. It's a lot easier now with the proliferation of a lot of other community tools like the ones that we're on now, but it's still pretty hard to make meaningful connections. You know, she ends up transitioning because she did so well at the group that she was leading into working for the company that's, you know, was sponsoring the groups. And then I took over a group and it grew from there. I doubled that group's attendance, handed it off to another individual, moved, grew more groups. Her and I were both transitioning into different roles. And throughout that whole time, you know, a lot of communication, a lot of talking back and forth. What are you working on? What are you hearing out there? What do people need? What's the word on the street? And then taking that information and bringing it back in and saying, okay, well, can we make some more tools? Can we grow the network? Can we look for people in some different places we haven't looked before and keep building it out? And I think it kind of peaks here, I think, is what we want to talk about next, where we get to this point where it's like, okay, we know who's out there. We know where our people are. We've found them or refound them or reconnected. And now we have to get everybody to this common baseline where we all have the skills to just be productive in our communities. I mean, you can tell just from hearing me and Rachel, we're pretty comfortable with public speaking. We're pretty loose. It's pretty natural to us. That's because we've done it hundreds of times, you know, and we've had to do it in front of thousands of people over and over and over again, and honed the skill. And it took, you know, feedback and training and other things to get to that point. And when you find groups like mine, you'll find that, you know, they're looking for guidance. You know, most people don't want to just operate on their own and come up with it on their own. They want to look for the charters and the lessons and the technology that you can share to make them better and make your groups better so that they're more professional, you know, across the board. That was a big thing that you know, Rachel had worked on in our community and helped a lot. And now, you know, years later, I sit in a place where, kind of similar to Rachel's situation, you know, I've used my experiences and connections at user groups, and we are a little bit of a unicorn. Not everybody's going to get a job in their user communities, but you'll find if you have really active members, that turns into other opportunities that you never thought of. I mean, it's something as small as presenting at a local business that I maybe never had access to before, to representing, you know, this company as a community member overseas at design summits in Milan or other international connections, working with some of the best designers, engineers, community members, you know, in the world. And this can all be done with that sustained effort, that sustained commitment. It definitely had its ups and downs. I mean, we're maybe painting a little bit of a rosy picture, but Rachel and I certainly had our frustrations with each other, with group members, with things that were happening around us. There's things like now we're dealing with COVID. We're doing this all virtually. That's a new, different thing that you have to deal with your communities. There's solutions to these problems and you can find them together, but you've got to just keep that sustained effort and be really open both ways about what the problems are so you can find solutions.
Yeah. And I think, you know, for us, one of my favorite parts of this story is pretty much at every evolution. And when we really like hit an inflection point and a step forward, it was either Dave or another organizer in the network that called me and said, Rachel, look at this. Like there's a gap. We need to have a bigger conversation. So in 2017, you know, me and Dave were kind of riding high. We're like, all right, we got everybody sort of on the same page. We've been doing these regular communications, like everything's feeling good. And Dave went to an event and he called me like immediately after the event ended. He was like, all right, we need to really help organizers learn how to introduce people. We need to really work on the slides. We need to work on some of this stuff because it was rough. So we actually introduced professional upskill. So I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but our organizers, not only did they get, you know, exclusive access to brand and product updates and to our product teams and to all of those spaces, but we also made sure that there were no questions or professional skills that we had developed over time that got taken for granted. So anybody could ask for anything. Like Dave said, we did AV workshops. We did those every week for quite a while when, you know, COVID popped, just to make sure everybody was comfortable using a webcam, because that was something that we took for granted that maybe they didn't know how to do yet. So the other piece of this puzzle that I think is really important is as you pull people up, they're going to pull people up. So if you're just starting this journey, focus on 10 people. Hell, focus on 8 people, focus on 6 people, whatever you need to do to make them 2.0, do it and take the time to do it, because they're going to reach back and they're going to pull their own. It's like a coaching tree. They're going to coach somebody up. They're going to bring somebody up. They're going to be super excited about that reciprocation and that value. So now let's really get into the meat of the workshop, because we're about halfway through. And let's talk about what happens after they become an organizer. So we've alluded to this quite a bit. What happens after they say, yes, I want to be an organizer? And Dave, I'm going to steal your words. I'm sorry. It's really easy to create a flash in the pan. All right. So it's really easy to get, you know, a few people excited and they're, yeah, we're going to run some events. We're going to do this stuff. It's a little bit harder to keep them excited 5 and 10 and 15 years later about doing those things that they were in the beginning. So what happens after? So I'm gonna bring a chart up. I didn't want to bring it up just yet because I don't want you overwhelmed and looking at it. First and foremost, little disclaimer. This communications plan that I'm about to show you was born over somewhere between like 4 and 6 years. It did not start off this way. So I want you to understand that. And I want you to be okay with that before it comes up. Second, we're going to go through sort of line by line what each of these events represented and start simple. If you're not communicating with your organizers on a weekly basis today, just do one thing. I'm not in any way asking you to go back and just fill out your whole calendar for, you know, the next 5 years. That's not our intention at all. Our intention is just sort of to talk through the process for us and the story for us and what each of these event types, what purpose they served for our organizers. So I repeat myself a lot, and we talked about this, right? I know all the answers, but I repeat them over and over and over again. So when it comes to organizer communications, we're going to talk about repeating yourself a lot. You have to say the same thing over and over because you're going to have 300 organizers. Hell, you're going to have 1,000. You're going to have 2,000. And they're not all going to be in the same room at the same time when you say it. So you have to make sure that there's a regular cadence for those comms and for those interactions between the organizer and the logo, between the organizer and the brand. So if you're not doing any kind of this already, I say the first thing you do, and this is the first thing that I did, I put weekly office hours on the calendar because Dave, just gonna keep saying it, Dave and I talked, and we realized that one of our biggest challenges is that everybody was kind of doing stuff a little bit different. It was all within the guardrails, but like Dave said, you ever been to, like you go to your favorite franchise and you get there and like the fries are not right? Like, right? Those aren't the fries that you signed up for. Events are the same way. So we started realizing some discrepancies and some inequities in how things were run across the board. So once a week, we said, let's get as many organizers as we can. If we can get a dozen organizers in the room to just brainstorm and talk about what's going well and what isn't, we're already better off than we were. So I literally had no agenda for weekly office hours when they started. I sent out, a note to everybody, said, hey, you can always call me. You can continue to do those things. It's totally fine. But I'm getting to a place where I'm really struggling to accept all of those phone calls and get back to you. So here's the committee. Have you met Dave? You can call Dave too. And now Dave points at Kirby and says, have you met Kirby? You can call Kirby too. But also I want to create a space where you can always get in touch with me, and that somebody else will always be there too if you want to, soundboard something. So these weekly office hours, when we started them, 6 people, 8 people, 12 people. But by the time we ended, we were hitting 250, 300 people a month. Like, we were having regular contact with our organizers. People were showing up every Friday. People were getting excited about these conversations. And really all the purpose that these events served was to know where Rachel was at, to ask questions that you had encountered throughout the week, and to hear the latest and greatest. Like, what, is there anything super cool happening? What is it? So these weekly events are nothing special. I maybe put together 2 slides for the stuff that I had to tell people. I didn't do anything beyond that. At the beginning, they're going to be discovery. How's the network really doing? Who are your people? What do they really want out of this? So we did this, what do you say, Dave? It took us like maybe 3 or 4 months to really build up a good cadence with this and get people used to it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it just goes back to like getting everything kind of uniform across the board when working with your teams, and for the people who don't necessarily have Rachel's number, or they're new to the community, they show up and see, oh, here's everybody else. Here's everybody else who's dealing with what I'm dealing with. So maybe I don't have to go directly to Rachel. I can reach out to somebody, like, for example, in our community, we have the committee leaders who are in the region. They can reach out to somebody who's an intermediary, who's a little bit more veteran, who's been around the block, knows a little bit of the chronology of how you got to where you are with this group to help avoid future issues, if you will. But just making that space for people to come in. It may even be as simple as airing grievances. People want to feel heard, and when they're heard, they're a lot more receptive to suggestions and change and a lot of other things, because it's a dialogue. It's not a dictate, which is really important.
You can mandate without dictating, and that's something that I really had to learn, and that was really difficult for me to get to a place where I could say, these are the guardrails. If you're not performing within the guardrails, we really need to have a conversation. But you can say it in such a way that, like Dave said, it's not a dictatorship, but hey, here's the guidelines, and these are the things that I really need you to do to own the logo. So there's a good balance there, and it took me a minute to find it. Every organizer is a different human, so you got to approach every one of those conversations differently. And the only way you're going to know how to approach it is if you have those regular interactions with them, and you know what kind of personality they are, and you know how they're going to respond to certain tactics. So Frederica, I see your comment, and I love your comment so much that I'm going to read it out loud for everybody because it is exactly what happened to us. So the comment is, office hours are not really working for me. My organizers prefer to have a monthly meeting to share feedback. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. No, you're not doing anything wrong. The reality is people got other stuff to do. They have full-time jobs. Everything that you're asking them to do is on top of their family and, you know, the reality outside of the confines of work and professional life. So we had the same experience. We would get, you know, the core group of diehards every week, but we would not reach the entire network of organizers on those weekly events. And Dave and I realized we were having some gaps in knowledge because people couldn't show up every week. And because there was no set agenda, they didn't really know what to show up for anyway. So in that regard, we kind of screwed up. So we actually implemented the last week of every month. If you were having, so let's say it's what is it? It's the end of August. It's the last week of August. So if you're hosting an event next month in September, I need you to come to the meeting the last week of August, because for that 1 hour, I'm going to brain dump and I'm going to upgrade your hardware and I'm going to tell you everything that I know that you need to know that we've talked about for the past month so that you can share that properly with your members and so that you're educated and so that you're not blindsided when you get into your event and they ask you something about brand that you were unaware of. So you're not doing anything wrong at all. I hit the same roadblock and we just sort of changed the way we did it. We still did Fridays because they were a blast. They were super fun. But we also implemented that sort of like once a month, we're going to recap everything. And I literally built that monthly slide deck with the questions that were asked throughout the month. And with, you know, anything my internal team said, hey, you should tell the user group leaders this. It would really help us if you got people to sign up for beta or like got people to sign up for the What's New events, like whatever was happening in the game. So Dave, before we go to the quarterly update, because I feel like that's a really big, that's a chunk of change. We're going to have a bit of a conversation about the quarterly update. Do you have anything you want to add about weekly or monthly comms?
Well, no, just that, you know, again, it's really important and it's empowering. I saw a couple questions in particular that hung out. There was one about, you know, what do you do if you have introverts versus extroverts? That weekly update was a perfect opportunity to figure out how could you, as a different person in a user group, support them. Like, I know I had an explicit example in my user group. I ran a group here in Long Island. One of the gentlemen who was helping me support the group, he was a major technical support person for a very large company. I mean, he had many people under him, a leader, you know, at his company, but he did not want to be the person in front of user group meetings. Now, you know, I would try to say, hey, you're really great at this. You're supporting our group in so many ways. I want people to know who you are and what's going on. And he just didn't want that to be his way. But we found a good balance where it's like he could be the man, you know, behind the drapes, so to speak, and help me out in the background. And he was glad with that, about that, because it helped the people that he was working with in his more direct community even more. So, you know, just because you're an introvert or an extrovert doesn't mean you're going to have success or lack of success with your user group. It's about finding ways to help people who are introverted, for example, so that they can have a little bit more skills when it comes to public speaking and engaging and introducing themselves, but also finding different ways that they can grow their group. Like we mentioned, we had guardrails for our groups, but there are differences between the different groups and how they participate based on the personalities that are running them. You get different flavors with every leader, and having that little bit of flexibility gives everybody else the opportunity to kind of find like, okay, where can I shine in this? I mean, I know people who have hosted meetings for our particular meetings. They're a couple, you know, hours long, usually technical presentations, where maybe the host will speak for 1 minute. I mean, literally just 1 minute, just, hey, I'm here, I'm your host. Let me know if you have any questions. And here's our great, you know, technical team tonight that's going to be sharing awesome content with you. And they just act as a facilitator, and they're completely happy to do that. And they're still getting the benefit out of being a part of the community. So you don't have to be a big personality, and you don't always have to foster big personalities. I would say foster every different kind of personality and make your groups as diverse as you can. You're just going to get better results out of them.
100%. All right, so we're gonna hit one more big topic, and then it's a workshop, so I have to give you tools to go to work. So we're gonna give you some tools here in a second. Dave, I don't know, like 2-3 minutes out, so I'm just gonna kind of wrap through. But one big point that I want to make here that I think is really important. I want to talk about this quarterly update. Because one of the biggest challenges for me, and raise your hand. We're gonna do one of those standing ovations. Raise your hand with an emoji if you have dormant organizers today. You know that they say they're group leaders, but they haven't run a group in a minute. Yes. So we've all been there. So what do you do to sort of remove that title from them? Like, what do you do to bring back your logo? What do you do? So this was really challenging for me. And you've sort of listened to me for a few minutes here. I'm pretty straightforward. I could pretty much cut to it if I need to. But in this particular instance, I really struggled to say, hey, like, you're really not doing what you say you're doing. Like, you maybe shouldn't advertise that you're a user group leader anymore. It was a hard conversation. So we sort of took a different approach. And I think that this approach not only helped save me from that awkward, uncomfortable moment, but also really empowered every organizer to police the community on behalf of the community. They wanted to know that when you hit every user group page, that there was a live event going to happen, and that was important to them. So what we did is we implemented a quarterly update. So I'm sure every single one of you has KPIs on the books. You say, we're going to host 300 meetings this quarter. We're going to have this many people in the room. We're going to have this many new faces. You have things that you're being tasked to do. So what we decided to do was actually expose those goals to our organizers. So once a quarter, I would say, hey, this is what I signed us up for. I'm sorry if you think it's too much. I believe in you. I am your ultimate cheerleader. You guys are going to kick ass and you're going to make it happen. Here's some ideas where we can start. And, oh yeah, by the way, here's what we said we were going to do last quarter, and we did it. So that is okay. Like, we're going to get to the ones that we're going to do now. So in doing that, something else really cool happened. Like I said, they started to police each other, because if somebody wasn't hosting a meeting, they'd be like, hey, who is this? And we implemented sort of a buddy system. So instead of Dave being the representative for the region and having to say, hey, like, what's going on with you? Somebody else at that lower echelon would sort of do it for him, or at least ping me or Dave and be like, hey, have you noticed? So the other piece of this, though, these event programs and these network programs, they cost money. They cost the brand money, right? They cost you a head count. They cost you resources. They cost you all of these things. And we had never really had that conversation with our organizers before. So what we used these quarterly updates to do was to say, if we can hit these goals, we can reinvest in certain ways that you guys want us to. So you tell me what you would love more than anything in the world, and I'll tell you what we got to do to fund it. And it really worked out well, I think, long-term, by just exposing how we could reinvest when those goals were hit, I think, was the message that we really went with, instead of auditing and, sort of asking people to step down, if you will. I've only had to do that twice, which I hope that, you've only had to do that never. But I really have only had to replace 2 in my history. So workshop time. I want to make sure there's time for some questions, because I've seen some really good ones. I want you to think about all of these things that we've talked about. I want you to think about how you can sprinkle some professional skills training in. I want you to think about how you can do weekly office hours. I want you to think about how and when and what you should tell your organizers tomorrow, right? Like, just reach out to them and see what they need to know. I want you to start there. And because none of us have to do this by ourselves. Just as if you were my organizers, I have also built some templates for you. So Aaron is going to put the Google Drive link into the chat here for you. He's already ready. He's on the gun, man. That's my guy in the chair. But we've got some weekly office hour stuff. All of this is, take this with a grain of salt, okay? This isn't gospel. These are just some ideas. So we've taken some ideas from CMX. We've taken some ideas from other organizations that we've worked with and say, hey, man, here's what we did. Try them out, see what they look like, see what they feel like, see what the cadence is for you. So you've got your starter templates to get you going. I hope you like how bright and shiny they are. That was my favorite part. And bottom line, y'all, tell your organizers everything, even if it is uncomfortable. Tell them everything because they are 2.0. They're you. They have to be able to serve the community when you are not in the room. Tell them everything. Let them ask hard questions. Let them, like Dave said, man, let them beat you up. That's if they're beating you up, they're telling you that something's wrong. And it's your job to understand it and redefine it and to fix it. So let them beat you up and get it going and listen to them. Because bottom line, like at the end of the day, what your organizers tell you is best for their members is probably the best thing for your brand. Because they're boots on the ground, they're talking to your customers every day. They know what's challenging them. They know what's going on. All these things your members know. You got to open it up. You have to listen to them. And it's your job internally. I used to make the joke that I'm sword and shield. So you come beat me up, I'll be your punching bag, whatever. You tell me if I got to get out my sword or my shield when we go up to headquarters, because I knew that they were right and we had to figure out a way to communicate those messages. So Aaron, my friend, I'm going to bring you up and I got 10 minutes. That ain't too bad. And we're going to do some Q&A. If y'all have not yet, please go to the Q&A tab of the session chat. If you don't have your own questions, that's totally great. I still want you to participate. Please upvote the questions that you would like to hear an answer to. And Dave and I will set them up and knock them down. If you have questions, now's the time to get them in there. Dave and I don't have all the answers. A lot of this was trial and error, man. So we will do our best to tell you what our experience was and give you some color and some ideas and something to start with.
If I could jump in, I'd like to take the one that's right at the top because I think I can speak from experience. Leslie was asking, how do you incentivize volunteer organizers like me? So again, to be clear, Rachel has never paid me $1. I haven't made any money off of this. If anything, I've paid probably to be places. But it comes in different forms, right? I mean, the first and foremost is time. You got to be willing to give some of your time. It's a hard thing to give, especially when time is our most valuable resource. You got to be willing to give your time and then try to include them. In our specific situation, we were working for a software company. So for me, that came in the form of maybe I have early access to software. Maybe I have early access to programs, betas. Maybe I get to participate in events like this and present in front of people or engage with different people. Things that, like Rachel mentioned, don't necessarily cost you a lot because you're participating in them anyway. It's just an inclusion thing. You bring them along for the ride, and that can go a long way. Sharing your network, sharing your connections, being a resource. Again, these are all things that don't necessarily cost money. They cost time, but you can use those to incentivize people. And I'll add one big incentive. If you have the kind of community that has to do with professional development, professional skills, learning, knowledge, there's going to become natural incentives that come out of it. When you take somebody like me, I mean, I've literally gotten 3 different jobs. The job I hold today at Peloton, one of the fastest growing companies in the country, came through my user group meetings. I was a presenter at a user group event at Peloton and got to know the staff there and some of the people who work there and got to network with them. And when time came for my application to come in, they knew exactly who I was because I'm a member of their community. And now as I sit here at Peloton, I can look out and say, I know all the members in the community here on the New York, Long Island area. It'd be pretty hard for you to be a CAD specialist, a mechanical engineer who's at a certain level, for me to not have at least heard of your name before. I get candidates who I've had applications from. It's like, I can find you from a different part of my network. I can go through Rachel to somebody else and they know about you. So the incentives come in all different kinds of shapes and forms, but it's how you choose to engage with your community. And the last thing I'll add is it's not always obvious. I think me and Rachel have both showed up to a lot of community events where we had explicit, specific goals, and we came out with something completely different. And that's
totally different.
And that's good, and that's fine. We all have that dream about, as members of a community, connecting with that one person at an event, that one, connection we can make. But if your members are a little bit open-minded, if you're open-minded as a community leader, you'll find that they'll make different connections that are even more valuable that they didn't even know about,
Yeah.
So.
And I want to take this question, I want to flip it over. Because somebody said this to me one day and it stuck with me forever. You ever have those moments where somebody says so profound, like something so profound, you're like, I'm going to call you about everything. I'm going to have you flip everything that I ever think about over. So when we were talking about rewards programs for our organizers, somebody brought up the idea of like, you should give them cash, right? Like you should consider paying for their time because time is money. And we all know that. And the gentleman in the room, he just kind of sat back in his chair and he let us flush it out and everything else. And at the end of the discussion, he said, I have one more thing to add. I said, all right, what is it? He said, what if I pay them more? He said, you can't buy loyalty. So the only thing that is going to build that loyalty is reciprocation. It's time. It's never going to be money. So anyway, I remember that moment and I will never forget that moment because it was shocking for me because damn, you're right.
Building off that, Rachel, one of the questions that I actually threw into the Q&A kind of ties into that. So how do you ensure that your community is benefiting both the company's brand in addition to the community members?
I think the way you measure and the way you report those measurements is going to be two different languages, right? So we talked about that quarterly update to members, and the numbers that we showed them were super tactical, right? So for me sharing with an organizer and saying, hey, I need you to get like at least 10 new people into your room this year or this month, or whatever fits the size of your community, that's really all they need to know. They just need to know that you really need new people in the room. But on the other side of that programming, on the brand side of that programming, I worked really closely with our reseller community. And I made sure that those sales guys were in the back of the room. They were flies on the wall. They were taking notes. They were really encouraging the suggestions and getting, that feedback back to product development. And if they, met someone at a user group meeting that turned into a lead, they gave us credit. So I think, how do you encourage organizers to participate and sort of benefit both sides? You're going to have to reward both sides without sort of talking about those rewards to both at the same time. And I think the other piece of that, go to the next one, because I could go on and on and on. We only got 4 minutes. I want to do more questions. That is a fantastic question. Different measurements for different audiences, and different messages for what achieving those goals means.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So another question that was real popular. So what other tools do you use to keep organizers engaged besides emails? Like, do you use Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, Slack? What's the best way to kind of scale your community and get your organizers to continuously engage?
Well, Bevy Virtual, of course. You host those weekly events and you host organizer meetups. It's all different. And really, I think the best advice I can give you here, it goes back to that bottom line. Listen to your organizers and meet your community where they're at. So like if your organizers say, hey, we kind of already started this thing on Slack and it's going pretty good, like can you help us build that? I think you try to help make that argument for them. For me, I would say sort of meet them where they are and try to make that a priority for your brand. I know, I understand that you're going to have, internal mandates for the tooling that you use and the technology you use and all those things. Meet them where they're at and don't let it get out of hand. So like cast a vote. Where do you want to be? You want to be on Facebook? You want to be on Slack? You want to be like, where do you want to be on Reddit? Where do y'all want to be? And majority is going to rule, but this is, as much of a democratic process as we can make it.
Awesome. And then one last question here before we run out of time. So you talked a lot about making organizers into your like personal clones, going out and doing all your work for you that you can't do because you can't be two places at once. But yeah. So these organizers, they aren't getting paid. So how do you make sure that you're not exploiting them for free work or maybe asking too much of them?
I had a litmus test. My litmus test was I have a full-time job as the spearhead of this community. Could I run the event that I'm asking them to run, doing all of the things I'm doing? So if I took my paycheck and the hours that the brand is paying me to sit in this chair away, would I run this event myself? And if the answer was no, I'd probably back off. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, if I was uncomfortable, I call Dave. I say, hey, Dave, what do you think? Could you do this? Like, do you have time to do this? And they'll tell you. And if you are abusing them and taking advantage of them, you need to watch your burnout rate. You need to watch your turnover. I saw user group leaders come in. They were young, they were hungry. They'd host, 10, 14, 15 events a year. And then next year they were gone. So I think limit your initial requests, make sure it's something that you yourself would be comfortable doing, with your current work schedule. And also don't be afraid to pump the brakes. Don't be afraid to slow them down, man. Rein them in so that they don't burn out, so that they do develop over that long term.
I'll just add on to that answer. It just ties right in with the communication. Like if you're constantly doing that communication and seeing how people are doing and having that touch point, you're going to know. It's going to become real obvious who's burning out and who's doing too much and who's screaming when they pick up the phone.
Is our cue. We're out of time, sir.
Thanks so much, everyone. That was awesome. Thanks, Rachel, Dave, Aaron as well. Yeah, fantastic conversation and loads taken from that. I know lots of connections were being made in the chat, so head on out to the lobby. There is one-to-one speed networking now available to those who have a strong drink in hand and are willing to do it. Go and meet some others and stick around for our final sessions after that on this first day of CMX. Thanks everyone so much.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you guys.
Happy Summit.